I do feel proud that we're part of the first generation that is taking mental health seriously, because mental health hasn't really been taken seriously like at any point in human history. Because like the idea of like two men opening up about their problems and one of them crying, the other one comforts them, isn't something that has ever been, well, if 50 years ago that would be seen as very abnormal and not healthy, even though we know that if you have a bereavement or you're depressed, that opening up about it is the way to solve it, and it stops having the power over you. So I'm proud that we're taking mental health more seriously as a society. It's one of the great things we've done in recent years.
Because within olden times, right, if you were to cry, if a man was to cry, then it wouldn't be seen as acceptable in the slightest. Men are supposed to be this tough, strong, solid, family supporting figure, or unit even, that's supposed to be there for the entire family and ignore their own emotions, their needs, their desires, and sacrifice their time in order to support the well-being of the entire family unit. And I think that's definitely true, man.
Yeah, to be honest, like, because we've had a lot, like, masculinity has been questioned a lot, you know, and there were people a lot talking about toxic masculinity around the problems of domestic abuse and sexual assault, and the fact that men don't open up about their feelings to the level that will probably be psychologically healthy. And I think there is definitely room for like a critique of how men have been portrayed or like have been seen to live in the history. And but as many things, I feel like masculinity, femininity are it's like a box, whereas I feel like people are very complicated. And I feel like if I could say everything it meant to be a man, it'd be I'd have a lot to say. I wouldn't be able to just list it in a couple traits.
But then again, I suppose there's not like a particular set of components is not going to result in you constructing the perfect man. I think there's no such thing as the perfect man. It all depends on the scenario in which he's placed, right? For instance, if you were to place your perfect man A, say, let's say with confidence, good money, good health, good money, good health.
Big man on the bike. It's a real man in the bike.
And then if you were to place him within, let's see, confidence, good money, good health. If you were to place him within, let's say, Africa, in a poor, deprived part of the country, in which has little resources, little support, very poor financial institutions, poor sanitation, poor health, he may not necessarily be the correct man for that scenario, because in that scenario, you may need a man who's qualified in, need a man that's qualified in medicine. Even though he's got good money, good health, good finances, if he's a construction worker, or if he's a man who owns a plumbing company, he may not be best suited to that scenario. And he may not be very empathetic deep down. If you have a lot of people suffering there, psychologically and physiologically, that's not going to help them in any way whatsoever. So I think it's best to look at which parts work where, and adjust your attitude and adjust your own components in relation to the environment that is, or adjust the components so that you suit the environment perfectly that you're placed within.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about, like, you know, there's all these, I mean, I'm obviously guilty of this, but there's all these how to be alpha videos, and obviously I did put that in my title of one of my videos to get some views. But I feel like like men are searching for answers to some degree, and I feel like that's one reason Peterson became so famous, because he was teaching men about responsibility. He was filling holes about things that weren't being told to men at school or by the parents anymore. And we have lost things as we have progressed, but we've gained things. And I do feel like one thing, I've thought a lot about what it means to be a man, what it means to be like manly and masculine. And I feel like there is definitely some perception of always having to be strong, never showing weakness. Whereas I really think a man who is willing to show vulnerability in front of other people is actually more confident than the guy who won't show any weakness at all, because the fear of, if I show weakness, then people will take that weakness and use it against me. But a man who can open up in front of other people and isn't scared to show some vulnerabilities, I think that's a deeper trust and confidence in themselves and around other people, that I'm gonna say these things, and I'm not gonna, if people might laugh, people might take the mick, but it's okay because I have the confidence to let these things out, and the confidence to actually not be the center of attention and not always be the big toughest guy in the room all the time. I feel like a lot of men who always feel like they have to be the alpha in every situation and have to be the loudest, the center of attention, I feel like it comes from a place of insecurity. It comes from a place of lack of self-worth in some situations.
Like within this scenario, if you were to speak with me a few years ago, I probably would have not liked the power dynamic of this talk we're having, because I'm not the center of attention. But now that I'm perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable with that, I'm perfectly accepting of that, because at the end of the day, I read a few books and it's like, oh, it's not, and I contemplated this, would it be really worth it? What are you achieving as a result of becoming this alpha, becoming this center of attention? It's not worth it. It's shallow, it's meaningless. It limits the happiness that an individual has within their own life, because eventually you come to the realization that you're only doing it for the approval and validation of others, which is as worthless as dirt. And even dirt is more worth. Technically, dirt has a value in and of itself, and that's even higher than being an alpha, right? Well, technically, there are some things that you can actually achieve as a result of being alpha, and perhaps that would result in more financial prosperity, more being more healthy. But psychological health deteriorates as a result of that, and I suppose psychological health deteriorates. But I suppose it technically depends on the individual, because it depends on the extent to which you become the alpha. It depends on the components, like you said, the components that you're adjusting, the extent to which you're adjusting them, and the scenario in which you're placed. Because if you're placed in a scenario in which being an alpha is advantageous for you and ensures your own survival, then that could be good. And so therefore the psychological suffering that you're imposing upon yourself because of that may be worth it in the long term, because it ensures your survival in the long term, and in the short term it's not so bad.
Yeah, this is very complicated. It's something that I'm glad we're talking about, because I'd love to make future videos about this topic as well, about masculinity and what it means to men. I mean, obviously, I mean, I'm not a woman, otherwise I'll probably do it about what it means to. But the thing is, I mean, I've thought about, I'm not sure if there needs to be like definite, a woman shouldn't, like a woman, if a woman was acting like me or you, or was like an alpha, they would get sort of a different kind of criticism, not because they're being too alpha or too center of attention, because they're not being womanly. And I thought, like, if I raised a daughter, I wouldn't want that daughter to feel like they couldn't act in a certain way, or they had to act in a certain way because they're a woman, which, I mean, so that's was a way of, because I've never had a sister, and if I had a sister, I'd want that to be like, I wanted to, you know, people in general, the traits that make good people are the same for men and women. Like, you know, strong person who can go through hard times, or like a courageous person who can fight through fear and get through hard times in their life, but they're also comfortable and confident enough to be kind to others and stuff. So I feel like we maybe get too obsessed with masculinity potentially, but I mean, a lot of men who are searching to be more masculine is just because they're kind of insecure about themselves, or they're not maybe getting girlfriends and stuff, and they feel like they need to become, I mean, I've definitely fallen into that trap where I feel like I have to be more of a man in order to attract more women, even though, you know, that's not necessarily going to be the case. But like you said, it boils down to what situation are you in? Because if you if we were cavemen, then the old classic masculine traits, which is having to be strong, physically strong, mentally strong, having to be courageous, and having to have skill in certain things, that's everything. That's way more important than emotional intelligence or kindness or any of that stuff. But we don't live in that world anymore. So those traits, they're not as needed by society, and they're not, you know, they're not actually given as much validation anymore by our society, and our society is transitioning. But remember that there's an old adage which is like strong men win the war to create the great society. The great society causes the men to become weak again, and then the weak men mess the society up again, and then the strong men have to create another. So that's the thing, is this cycle where it's like the phrase, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So we have to be careful. Like I said, maybe we probably are too soft in some ways, but then again, if it's allowed us to make certain progress from things like mental health and gender relationships as well. So I think it's positive for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking, if a person, regardless of gender, they can be whoever they want, and they can have whatever attitude they want, they can have whatever personality they want, they can do whatever they want. They shouldn't be judged for what they're doing at all, I think. Well, it depends on what their actions are and within the law, of course.
Well, hopefully,
if they're acting within out the boundaries of the law, then of course they're going to have to be judged and brought to justice, because that's unacceptable. But that's a debate for another day, because that also depends on the scenario in which you're placed. For instance, sometimes you have to steal bread in order to prevent your family from starving, right? So, like in the olden days.
Yeah, I mean, I would have
starvation.
I would have done that. I would have done that. I would have steal bread for my family.
So there's no such thing as good. There's no such thing as good and bad. It always depends on the perspective from which you look at it, like I'm saying. So I'm going off on a tangent again, but coming back to what I was saying, it's perfectly okay, it's perfectly acceptable, and it's perfectly fine for an individual to act however he wants to, of course, except if it's reasonable and it's within the boundaries of the law, of course, and it's fine. If and it doesn't matter upon the gender as well, because when it should be done for the soul. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we're all looking to see what generates the highest level of utility and happiness for us. So if behaving in a certain way, if it's masculine or it's feminine, that's perfectly fine. Just it depends on you. It depends on the individual. They should not be judged for it. You should not be looking for the approval and validation of others. You should be looking deep down for who you want to be, what you want to do, and what generates the highest level of happiness and utility for you as a person, and then look towards the rest of society and see the way by which you can utilize that, monetize that, and generate value for the rest of society. Coming back to the other issue which we were talking about, saying how many men may be looking towards alpha videos because of the fact that they are insecure. I think that might be an oversimplistic analysis of what's happening here, because as we've said, there's a multitude of reasons as to why it can occur. For instance, if you have a man looking towards that kind of video, he may actually be going towards that video because that may be the best video for him to be looking towards, or maybe he may be lacking direction in life, and so that may be one component which he needs to get in place before he moves on to the next. Or he may be looking towards direction because he's unconfident in his own judgments, unconfident in his own abilities. But of course, that conforms to the idea of insecurity. So it's insecurity, maybe insecurity in one way or another, or it may be as a result of a multitude of other factors which we don't have the ability to comprehend using our own intellectual faculties.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna steal you. Obviously, that could have been one of many factors. But I'm gonna nick a phrase from Jordan Peterson, one of his biggest phrases, which it's a very simplistic analysis of a more complex multivariate equation, which is very true. People like to do that as well. And I've talked from personal experience. Like, I'd watch a lot of those videos, and part of it was coming from like a lack maybe of insecurity. But like an insecurity, I feel like that word is too powerful. Like, people don't admit they have any insecurities. It's like everyone has insecurities. I try. It's not a dirty word. Like psychologically, we're always going to be dealing with certain, all insecurities are where in your brain you're not completely happy with things you do or things you are. So you're not going to be completely satisfied all the time. So they all have insecurities. So like, if I feel like sometimes if you say, maybe if you say to someone, maybe that's just you're being insecure about that, people can take it to heart, because it's been used as quite a powerful word recently. But I feel like people need to, another thing to help with mental health is just for everyone to accept that everyone has insecurities, and how you tackle those insecurities is actually the difference between a good and a bad person. Because if that insecurity of not being a strong enough man leads you to, some men, it leads them to be prone to violence and aggression, or some men, they can deal with those insecurities and find some further self-confidence. So dealing with your insecurities is the difference between good and bad people sometimes. So I feel like people should be honest with themselves and be humble about themselves and realize they're not perfect. They do have issues. that they're dealing with, and I feel that can help people a lot.